Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Uh, Today, I want to do another tier ranking. I'm going to do the films of Steven Spielberg, but I'm not going to do all of them. He's done obviously quite a bit. I'm going to contain this, and I'm going to do the films from Mr. Spielberg from 1971, when he hit the ground running with the great TV movie Duel. I am going to include that, even though it's technically a TV movie here in the United States. It was released theatrically in Europe, and it's considered by most his first cinematic effort, not just because that it played in theaters in Europe, but because it is so accomplished. It's certainly among the greatest TV movies ever made, and you can see everything that is to come in his career inside of that movie. It's so well done, so good. So I am going to include that here. So that will run from Duel to Always in 1989, which is 13 movies. Interestingly, the same amount of movies as in my previous tier rankings with the career of Stanley Kubrick, one of Steven Spielberg's close friends. And they talked all the time over the telephone throughout their careers. Kind of fascinating that Kubrick does 13 films in more than 40 years, and Spielberg does 13 in the span of 18 years. Different career paths, different styles, but that's the great thing about art. You get totally different approaches, different styles, great art that can be viewed in different ways. Spielberg's quite an interesting person. As I stated in the Kubrick rankings, Stanley Kubrick is my favorite director of all time. I think he's the greatest director who has ever practiced this art form. But Steven Spielberg changed my life with one of these films that we're going to do today. He opened up the power of film for me, the art form of film, and my life has never been the same since I was a boy. I've had the great fortune to see all of these movies in the movie theater from Jaws forward. I wish you guys listening out there, watching out there, had the same good luck to see all of these in the movie theater with the crowd. It's just a totally different experience. All right, with all of that said, let's jump right into this and start with Duel in 1971 with the great Dennis Weaver. And I'm going to put that in the A tier. I don't think that you can put that in the S tier. I think that's going a little bit too far, especially for a TV movie. But this is such a good movie, and I think this was a perfect training ground for Jaws. When you think about it, this is really Jaws on the road. Dennis Weaver is playing a guy who's being chased and pursued by this seeming force of nature with this big truck. We never see the driver at all. We see his hand from time to time, his arm out the window. He points, he gestures. We see his boots at one point. We never see him. Think about how that it runs as a really good parallel to the shark. We don't really see the shark until way into the movie. And what we can't see is always scarier than what we can see, because we imagine much worse than what actually unfolds before our eyes most of the time. So this is fascinating, and I think it's something we can relate to as well. What much more than a shark chasing us in the water, being eaten by a shark. That's incredibly rare. Maniacs on the road is unfortunately all too common. And those big trucks, they're scary things because they are big, they're powerful. If you get a guy behind the wheel who is not only angry but is homicidal, that is something to truly be frightened of. So Dennis Weaver plays just a regular Joe who somehow offends this guy in the semi, and they just engage in this great cat and mouse game through kind of rural California throughout most of this film, which isn't very long. So well done in terms of Spielberg's technique. He's always been the master of pacing, and particularly when it comes to suspense. The worst of his films aren't terrible. They're all watchable to some extent. So we see that in Duel here with the pacing, the car chases, the camera work. It's all perfect and spot on. There's something really, really satisfying about seeing a young artist just beginning his or her craft, and you see the maturation over the scope of time, and you see them getting a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better, but you can see the germs of the genius that is to come. All right, that takes us to the Sugarland Express in 1974. Now, this is his first cinematic feature. He does it for Richard Zanuck and David Brown, the same guys who produced Jaws. I'm going to place this in the B category. I'm very, very tempted to put this in A. There are things in this movie that are fantastic. I think he gets a really good performance from Goldie Hawn and from William Atherton as this husband and wife team, that they're recidivist, petty thieves. They're not bad people per se. Yeah, they're criminals and they have a criminal record, but they're obviously poor. They're uneducated. They really don't have much else to do to try to get ahead. The crux of this film is that William Atherton is essentially going to this type of halfway house after serving a sentence for larceny, and Goldie Hawn goes to visit him in this very, very minimum security facility to break him out so they can go and get their small child who has been taken into custody by the state and put into foster care. Goldie Hawn has been deemed an unfit mother because of her criminal record and history, and she wants nothing more than to get her child back. It's a great premise, and for most of the time, it works in terms of what Spielberg and his screenwriters, Matthew Roberts and Hal Barwood, are trying to do, but it doesn't work completely. The characterizations are a little bit thin. We never get enough about their lives and their histories to really make them compelling. I wish we had more. It would make this so much more effective and emotional, which is what's one of the surprising things, considering it's a Spielberg film. And Spielberg is obviously renowned for his ability to get us emotional as audience members, to play out our emotions. Most of his critics say sometimes that veers into the realm of being maudlin. I think that's true rarely. This isn't one of them, though. And with the subject matter, he should be getting more emotions from us in this situation, but they're just a little bit too thin. And the entire movie is just Goldie Hawn and William Atherton on the run. And there are a lot of car chases that they probably spend way too much time engaging in instead of fleshing out the characters. But it is compelling, and obviously it's just, again, very well made, great shots, great cinematography from Vilmos Zsigmond, who Spielberg works with again on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The co-editor is Verona Fields, who edits and wins an Oscar for Jaws for him. And the music is his very first collaboration with the great and peerless John Williams. So it's definitely worth seeing. It just kind of lacks a punch, and I think the thing that hurts it the most is Goldie Hawn's character, who is really in this ostensibly to get her child back. But by the end of the film, she gets wrapped up in this sudden fame as people find out that they're on the run and they're in the newspaper, on the TV news, and people are showing up to see them in a car, and she's thrilled by this, and she loses sight of the fact that they're trying to get her son, which I don't think would happen with the way that this character has been presented to us for the majority of the film. And so I don't think it works. And I think that's the biggest flaw, and that drags it back into the B. Okay, so that takes us to the first of Steven Spielberg's masterpieces, Jaws. There is no way in the world this doesn't go anywhere but in the S tier. This is one of the classic films of all time. Now, I don't think it's one of the greatest films ever made. This isn't going to be in one of my top 20 lists of the 20 greatest films in terms of the art form. It's absolutely among my top personal favorites because it changed. As I alluded to earlier, I didn't give the title, but this is the film that changed my life. I saw this movie in a movie theater the summer before I turned 9 years old, and it blew me away. I was so awestruck by it, and I've mentioned this to so many people through the years, that this is the film that showed me that a movie could hit you on so many levels and do so many different things simultaneously, where it could be exciting, it could be scary, it could be thrilling, it could be funny, it could be all of these things at one time and just completely hold you enthralled for 2 hours, wondering what the heck is going to happen, how is this going to resolve itself. Just one of the great thrills of my life to see this over and over and over again in the movie theater that summer of 1975. I don't know how many times I've seen this movie through the years. probably too many to count. If it fails anywhere, it's in the characterizations, which are a little bit thin. And that's a problem. If you're going to talk about great craft and great movies, it's there. We just don't know nearly enough about the Hooper character or the Quint character. We know a little bit more about the Brody character because he's at the center of things and is in most of the scenes, but we still don't know enough. What brought him to Amity from New York, all kinds of stuff, right? That we could learn and know about these people that we don't know. But the rest of it is pure gold, right? The fact that the shark didn't work very often. They have so many problems with it. Forced Spielberg to get creative and to shoot without being able to see the shark. It was the biggest blessing in disguise of all time because, again, what we can't see scares us way more than what we can. And imagining that shark into that water with all the stuff in the beginning, where John Williams' iconic music, the camera work, where we know the shark is there, we just can't see it, and that's what gets under our skin. Of course, that final finish where they're trying to catch it, and the Hooper character looks like he's going to die, and he escapes, and then the shark gets Quint, and Brody trying to shoot it and explode that tank in the shark's mouth before the boat can sink under the water, the shark can get him. Just one of the great moments in movie history, right? You're going to need a bigger boat. One of the great lines of all time. I could talk about this movie all day, but I won't. S tier, one of the great movies ever. Okay, so that brings us to Spielberg's follow-up to Jaws, which is Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977. That's also absolutely in the S tier. Now, there are also problems with this. None of these films are perfect, right? They're all flawed a little bit. I think Close Encounters, the flaw here is we do get this really nice portrait of Richard Dreyfuss with his family, his wife played by Terry Gard, his children, as he has this encounter with an alien spaceship that he can't shake. The people who encounter it get this image in their mind of what we later learn is Devil's Tower. They can't explain it. They don't know why. They become obsessed with it. And we see Richard Dreyfuss's family kind of crumble and fall apart as they think he's going crazy. And he thinks he's going crazy because he can't understand why he can't focus and why he keeps getting this image of this mountain in his head for reasons he can't explain. He abandons his family, and it compels them to Wyoming, where he and Melinda Dillon, whose child has been abducted, and she has had this close encounter as well, go and that tour de force sequence at the end where the aliens communicate with the scientist there at Devil's Tower in the dark. Just a great sequence. It's, one of those things that opens our imagination to the wonder and the majesty of the universe. The universe just seems like it's too big a place, way too big a place for just us. As this has been said in some works before, it would seem like an awful waste of space, if that's the case. Okay, that brings us to Spielberg's first setback, right? And he makes all of these first movies by the time he's 30. Before he's 30, Close Encounters, by the time he's turning 30, Hollywood really hasn't seen a wunderkind like this since Orson Welles. And a lot of them are quite resentful. He doesn't get his due from the Academy until way later. They think all this money and success is enough for him without giving him awards as well. And so I think a lot of people in Hollywood were not broken up at all when he stumbled a little bit in 1979 with 1941. Now, 1941, I'm going to place in the C tier. I think a lot of people will put it even lower than that. Now, the reason I put it in the C tier is that, as I said up front, every Steven Spielberg movie is eminently watchable. The craft is always great. He never falls on his face as a director, as a craftsman. They're all very, very well done and great to look at. Special effects in this are great. The acting is amusing for what it is. Everything is exciting. There's just not enough there. It's way too broadly comic. Much of it misfires. It doesn't go together very well. It just seems like a lot of chaos. And going to make a comedy, it's got to pay off comedically, and this does not, which is shocking considering that it was written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, the same guys who go on to make the Back to the Future movies. It seems like an absolute guaranteed success. You got Spielberg behind the camera. You got Zemeckis and Gale writing. You've got great actors and comedians like John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd starring roles. How does this miss? But it does. And I think it misses because Steven Spielberg, for all of his talent, he's not a maker of comedies. Now, most of his movies have comedic moments, and those are very well done. but they're not comedies. They're just something to break the tension. He hasn't done an out-and-out comedy since, I think for obvious reasons. It's not his forte. So this is a misfire. He has said that he is proud of it, he likes it, but acknowledging that it also is flawed. It does have its admirers, it does have its fans, but on the whole, it's widely considered to be one of his weaker, if not his weaker films, if not his weakest film. I happen to agree. I don't think it's his weakest film. That one's to come at a later date, but it is close. It's right up there. I'm not a big fan. I have not actually even seen it in a long time because I don't really have a huge desire to revisit it. Okay, but he comes back in a big way. This is like striking out, and then you come up for your next at bat and you hit a 500-foot home run, because he rebounds from 1941, 2 years later, 1981, with Raiders of the Lost Ark, which obviously goes into that S tier as well. This is one of the greatest experiences that I've ever had in a theater, just like I had with Jaws. It was mind-blowing to see this on the big screen in 1981. This iconic character of Indiana Jones, the archaeologist, brilliantly portrayed by Harrison Ford. It's just a fun ride from beginning to end. It never lets up. This movie is never dull. You can't take your eyes off of it. And it is funny in parts. Again, Spielberg nails that. But more than anything, it's just so exciting. One of those, he works with George Lucas on this. They wanted it to be one of those wild rides like they used to see as kids with the serials, the movie serials from the 1950s that would leave you hanging on the edge of the seat for a week before you came back and see how it resolved itself. That spirit is so well captured here. And then you come up with a plot device like the Ark of the Covenant that makes whatever army carries it invincible, and the Nazis are searching for it to make themselves invincible so they can conquer everything they want to conquer. And it's up to Indiana Jones and the Americans to stop them before that can happen. I mean, come on, that's one of the great movie plot devices ever. How does that not compel you? And again, keep you on the edge of your seat, rooting, literally cheering in the movie theater, bouncing up out of your seat and cheering wildly at the end. Impossible not to. Way too fun. Again, one that's a must-see if you haven't seen it. Okay, so here he rebounds immediately, not rebounds, he goes on the next year and hits another 500-foot home run with E.T., which I'm also going to put in the S tier. I don't like this movie as much as I did when I was younger. I think that it is flawed. I think it's a little too saccharine at times. I think it spends too much time with the silly aspects of it. The E.T. character comes off as, I think, a little too cutesy. As I get older, that I don't buy into it as easily as I did when I was younger. But it is magical movie making. I remember when this came out, people were talking about this was going to be treated as the Wizard of Oz of the next couple of generations. I don't know if it's actually done that. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this movie much anymore, even though it absolutely is a classic. It is one of those movies that packs an emotional wallop. Henry Thomas is amazing in his starring role here as Elliot, who becomes the caretaker of E.T. as he's stranded on planet Earth. And then E.T. wants to try to get back home with Elliot's help. The help of his family. Drew Barrymore, her first role as a small kid, and she's fantastic. Spielberg is always amazing with children. He gets the greatest child performances. He got one from the young boy in Jaws. He gets one from the young boy in Close Encounters. He gets a handful here in this one. He's just a brilliant actor director with young actors, with kids. And that's a lot of fun here. Obviously at the end, as the E.T. is getting sick, being up here on the planet because it's not his home planet. And when we think that he has died, that is devastating. And when he comes back, we're just weeping buckets. And again, when he leaves, same thing. And I'll cop to that. I cry in this movie every time I see it. Another one, though, I have not seen in a while, but definitely I'll keep it up there. It is a cultural classic and, of course, worth seeing if you haven't seen it. All right, so this is when it's time for another kind of misfire. And a lot of people don't put Twilight Zone, the movie, on a list like this because it's done in vignettes, and Spielberg only does one episode, if you want to call it that, or a vignette called Kick the Can with Scatman Crothers. And it's one of, if not the weakest of the episodes in the whole movie. it's really just, it doesn't work very well. It has a moment at the end where the old man who doesn't want to participate with the others and playing this game of kick the can from this mysterious visitor played by Scatman Crothers, and it makes them young. He doesn't realize that. The holdout doesn't realize that until later, and then he wants to be young like the rest of them, and that's sad in its own way. But it just does not have the emotional punch that it should have and that his other movies have. And quite frankly, for the first part of it, man, you never say this about a Spielberg movie, but it's a little bit boring, I gotta say. And then it kind of hits that emotional mark a little bit when the guy realizes that he can't become young again, and he's just got to stay an old man, and then they move on with the rest of the movie. Obviously, the highlight of Twilight Zone, the movie, is the ending sequence directed by George Miller of the Mad Max movies, who does a revisit of Terror at, I think it's called 30,000 Feet, with John Lithgow playing this William Shatner role. It was an adaptation of one of the episodes from the original series, and John Lithgow sees this gremlin on the engine, on the wing of the plane, turning up the engine, and he's amazing, and it's very well made. That's the home run in this film. It does not come from Spielberg. That's a definite C, almost a D, really. If it had gone on much longer, it might have been a D, but not really a film by Steven Spielberg. But hey, you got to take accountability and responsibility for what you do. All right, he follows that up the next year in 1984 with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I'm going to put that in B. A lot of people have problems with this, the violence. This is one of the movies that ushered in the PG-13 rating because of the violence. I think it's a fine follow-up. I like most of it. Obviously, most of the knock is on Kate Capshaw's performance. Can be really grating and annoying, and that's certainly true in parts. A lot of people accuse it of cultural insensitivity, even to the point of perhaps racism. I'm not ready to go that far with it. I think it's just uneven. And I think the stuff and the supernatural elements, I'm not a huge fan of. It worked to a degree in Raiders. I think all of the Indiana Jones movies ultimately suffer from supernatural aspects that don't completely work. I think it worked best in Raiders. I think they all got kind of subsequently worse from there in terms of the suspension of disbelief and buying into the supernatural aspect of it, starting with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The stuff in the mind-blowing, I guess no pun intended there, and incredibly well done. Won an Oscar for the special effects, and they were great. That's a fantastic sequence. The beginning sequence where he runs into Kate Capshaw's character, who's the nightclub singer, and he gets poisoned, and they're looking for a diamond, and amazing. Great way to open the film. You can see that in that sequence with Harrison Ford in a white tuxedo and being very suave. You can see that Spielberg, who had said he had wanted to make a James Bond movie from the time he was very young, that's his James Bond moment in the beginning of that film. None of the first three Indiana Jones movies are terrible. They're just, none of them can live up to the original, which is the case with most movies and their sequels. But worth a watch. It is fun. All right, that takes us to the next year with The Color Purple. I'm going to put that in the A tier. That's bordering for me on the S tier. I think Spielberg and everybody involved in this movie really got a raw deal by the Academy. This holds a dubious distinction by sharing the record for the most Oscar nominations without winning any. This movie was nominated for 11 Oscars and was shut out. It was, I believe, the very first instance where the winner of the Directors Guild of America award, in this case Steven Spielberg, wasn't even nominated for the Oscar at the Academy Awards. That's unheard of. The winner of the Directors Guild Award, 98% of the time, goes on to win the Oscar. I'm pulling out that number, but it's about right. They just go hand in hand. It's the same voting body. So why wouldn't they just repeat? It's the same people voting. So it's really almost unexplainable that they would award Spielberg the DGA award, and then he wouldn't even get a nomination for Best Director here. It just defies belief. How can you not say that they had it in for him? and they were resentful. This is his first quote-unquote serious movie, and they give it all this attention and lavish all this praise on it, and then they kind of turn their back on him. It's hard to kind of say that it wasn't personal at this point. Now, he's fortunate in that he handled it with such grace that they were forced to forgive him. And then, of course, later in his career, and it didn't take all that long, he is given these awards, beginning with Schindler's List in 1993, where he finally gets his Oscar for Best Director. I love The Color Purple. I think it's a great adaptation of Alice Walker's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, the same name. Set in the Depression, focused on the African-American experience and Jim Crow America and all the horrible racist things that the African-Americans had to endure at that point in American history. Whoopi Goldberg, who had never acted, rightfully gets an Oscar nomination, as does Oprah Winfrey. They're making their acting debuts, and they're just incredible. The acting is just top-notch, incredibly emotional. This movie, I think, more than any other Steven Spielberg movie, at the end, I've lost it. The reason it doesn't go to the S tier is that Spielberg shies away from the more controversial aspects of the novel instead of just approaching them and dealing with them head on. In the book, the Whoopi Goldberg character and the singer that her jerk husband is attracted to, they end up having a lesbian relationship that Spielberg only very vaguely hints at. He didn't want to go there. I think ultimately it's a mistake because he softens it too much. And I think what ends up happening is he looks afraid to deal with it. There shouldn't be anything that detracts from the power of this narrative, his craftsmanship. Just a really, really moving, well-acted, well-made film that deserved better in terms of awards. So I would say definitely give that a look. If you haven't seen it, well worth it. Okay, that takes us to Empire of the Sun from 1987. I'm going to put this in the B category. I vacillated in my mind between A and B here and what to do with this. I put it in B ultimately because it's too disjointed for me. It doesn't really know what it wants to be tonally, narratively. It's confusing in many parts. It's surreal feeling in many parts. If that's what Spielberg's going for, he got it, but it comes at the cost of it feels like it doesn't work. It's not cohesive. It's a little bit incoherent in parts, and it suffers from that, which is a shame because, again, beautifully shot, and John Williams' score is incredible. And the most incredible aspect of this movie, I think, again, by leaps and bounds, is the child performance from, I believe he was 12 years old at the time, Christian Bale. This is the movie that put him on the map and got his name out there at 12. And his performance, I mean, you can see right here why he goes on to be one of the most acclaimed actors of his time. He carries this movie on his shoulders, and he should be lauded for that. But in the end, the story of a boy who gets separated from his parents in World War II and then stuck in a prisoner of war camp. He and his parents are in China. They end up eventually in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. John Malkovich is in it. It works in parts. Overall, it does not, for me anyway. But if you haven't seen it, give it a look, if for no other reason than to see Christian Bale breaking out as a kid, where you can see the flashes of what's going to come when he is an adult. All right, the final two here. The first is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I know a lot of people, this is their favorite of the Indiana Jones movies. I'm not a huge fan, and I kind of consider this one on the same level, and I put it on the same level as Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I just think there's too much stuff here that he's done already. It's just a retread. We have the Nazis again. It just doesn't feel original. It's hokey in parts. It just doesn't work for me. I think the special effects are bad in many parts, especially early. There's a ship sequence where it's just awful. The ending stuff with the knight that's guarding the protecting the caretaker of the Grail itself, it just doesn't work for me at all. I just scoffed at it. I could not suspend my disbelief for that. the highlight of this, and the thing that does work the best and does make it the most enjoyable, is the relationship between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery, who plays his dad, and they're at loggerheads, and that relationship's a ton of fun, and the kind of the friction between them in this is by far the most enjoyable aspect of the movie. And it's a ton of fun in the beginning to see kind of a little bit of an origin story of Indiana Jones with River Phoenix as playing the young Indiana Jones, and he's great in that. And of course, that's very sad. And what ends up happening with him? So there are good things about it. I don't hate it. I just don't think it's great, and I think that it's overrated by a lot of the fans of this franchise. I think some of that is just that it's a rebound from maybe the people who were really disappointed from Temple of Doom. All right, so that leads us finally with Always, which is one of the lesser known of the Spielberg movies. It's interesting in that because it's actually a quite moving film. Again, I'm a sucker for the Spielberg schmaltz, and this story about Richard Dreyfuss playing this pilot. He flies planes that help put out raging forest fires, and he is kind of a little bit too gung-ho and takes too many risks, which ultimately come back to bite him. And he is killed in trying to put out this fire. His girlfriend is Holly Hunter. His best friend is played by John Goodman. And when he dies, he meets this angel figure played by Audrey Hepburn in her last role. And it's kind of his mission before he can move on to the next stage of the afterlife to help the people he left behind put their lives in order, including getting Holly Hunter in a new romantic relationship, which is obviously very hard for him since, as he says, that's my girl. Hunter, I'm a huge fan of, always have been. She's amazing in this. I always like John Goodman. He's very good in his role. Dreyfuss grates a little bit, like I said earlier. I'm not a huge fan of his. It's always amazing to see Audrey Hepburn. The weakest link, though, is Brad Johnson, who plays the love interest. He'd never really acted, and he is quite weak, and that drags the movie back a little bit. So I think his performance, more than anything, prevents this from moving any higher. And really, on the whole, the subject matter, the way it's shot, everything else, it's never going to be a great film. Perhaps with somebody better than Brad Johnson, it goes into that A category, at least for me, because I'm moved by it. I laugh in it, and I think it's just really well crafted. It's a remake of a movie called A Guy Named Joe that Dreyfuss and Spielberg had talked about all the way back on Jaws and Close Encounters in terms of a movie they always liked and thought about remaking, which they finally ended up doing in 1989. So there we go. There are the movies. So I think maybe some people might be surprised that I put so many in the B and below that, so what do we have here? A total of 7 out of 13 B's or C's. That might seem a little bit harsh. I just believe in being realistic and a little bit demanding and tough. Those 4 movies at the top, 4 out of 13 in that S tier category, that's nothing to scoff at. That's amazing. And those all 4 absolutely deserve to be there, and they're classics for a reason. I think Duel and The Color Purple are amazing films in totally different ways and in totally different subject matter and genres. But none of these are a hard watch in terms of you feel like you're wasting your time or your money. So check them out. And if you're here and checking this out and you've lasted again until the end, I appreciate it, as always. I hope you enjoyed it. If you disagree, let me know. That's what we're here to do, is to talk about it, discuss, have a friendly debate. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to see it. I'm happy to get back to you. And hopefully I will see you around the bend the next time. And thanks again for all of your support. We'll see you soon.